Hello, my name is Kirsten Phoenix, and this is my presentation on alcohol, suicide, and Alaska youth. Alcohol was brought to the Native Alaskans in the 18th and 19th centuries by Russian and Euro-American explorers. The frontier drinking style of binge drinking has set the standard for how alcohol is consumed among Native Alaskans today. While some Alaska natives may have used fermented berries to produce alcohol, it is believed that the Aleuts and the Koniags were the first Native Alaskans introduced to alcohol by Russian fur traders. The Russian fur traders taught them how to make kvass, a liquor drink composed of apples, roots, or grains with a very low alcohol content. It is believed the Tlingits in the southeast region were first introduced to alcohol from a French ship in 1790 and from there began trading precious furs for alcohol and firearms with ships from New England. This notion of binge drinking being taught to the Native Alaskans by explorers was also confirmed during a focus group conducted in a hub village above the Arctic Circle by researchers Seal, Schallenberger, and Spence. Participants noted that alcohol was not indigenous to their culture and was introduced by whalers, fur traders, and visitors from Russia, who sporadically brought large quantities of distilled spirits to their communities. Since 1867, when Alaska became a U.S. territory, there has been a long history of alcohol laws and regulations throughout Alaska. One of the only laws the United States initially created regarding Alaska was outlawing importing alcohol into Alaska and selling alcohol to natives. In 1937, alcohol sales became legal through a local option law, giving native villages the right to choose for themselves. When Alaska became a state in 1959, only cities and local boroughs were recognized as local governments, not village councils, legalizing the sale of alcohol in native villages once again. It was not until the 1980s that the Alaska State Legislature gave control back to native villages through the Alaska Local Option Law of 1980. This law gives unincorporated communities the right to vote on prohibiting the sale of alcohol, prohibiting both the sale and importation of alcohol, or allowing alcohol sales at licensed stores. By 1986, the law was amended to add banning the possession of alcohol, and this law still remains in effect today. The local option law is designed to help communities combat alcohol abuse and the related problems of fetal alcohol syndrome, domestic violence, sexual abuse, suicide, accidental deaths, juvenile crime, and violent crime. The provisions of the local option law are complex, in part because the regulations have been amended over time, but the essence of the law states that communities can hold elections to decide whether they will be designated a dry, damp, or wet community. In a dry community, alcohol is prohibited. It cannot be legally imported, produced, sold, or consumed within the community by anyone. Excuse me. Most of the hub towns are damp. This means limited amounts of alcohol can be imported for personal use. Each community sets its own limits for the type and amount of alcohol that can be imported and determines the penalties for violations. In most communities, illegally importing or selling alcohol is a Class C felony. Larger towns such as Anchorage, Fairbanks, and Juneau are wet. These communities have liquor stores, grocery stores that sell beer and wine, and restaurants and bars that serve alcohol. Retailers in these communities are required to know and obey the local option laws when shipping alcohol to rural communities. Though the local option law provisions have been in place for several years, alcohol abuse remains a prevalent problem in the bush due to bootlegging and smuggling. The Alaska State Troopers Drug and Alcohol Report explains that these are very lucrative crimes. A bottle of liquor costing only $10 in an urban liquor store will sell for $50 in a damp town and more than $150 in a dry village. The average suicide rate of Alaskan Natives was more than 2 times higher than non-natives, according to a report covering a 6-year period and released by state health officials. The report chronicles the characteristics of suicide among Alaska Native and non-Native peoples from 2003 to 2008 and finds there was no statistically significant changes over the 6 years. The report says 65% of 1,347 violent deaths in Alaska between 2003 and 2008 were suicides. It finds that the average annual suicide rate among Alaska Natives was 40.4 per 100,000 people, compared with 17.7 per 100,000 people in the non-native population. Alaska Natives who committed suicide were younger than non-natives, with 2/3 of the deceased under the age of 29. By contrast, only 1/3 of non-natives who committed suicide were 29 or younger. Alaska Native males between the ages of 20 and 29 had the highest suicide rate at 155.3 per 100,000 people. Not every suicide victim was tested for alcohol or drug content, but of those who were, 54% of Alaska Natives and 47% of non-natives had alcohol present in their system at the time of death. Suicide rates for Alaska Natives were highest in the Northwest Arctic, followed by Norton Sound and the Yukon-Kuskokwim areas. The suicide rate of Alaska Natives living in hub communities, 25.8 per 100,000, was much lower than those living in non-hub, 60 per 100,000. One of the report's recommendations was to provide village-focused suicide prevention programs in these smaller communities. Community efforts like culture camps for kids teach traditional knowledge, instilling a strong sense of place and self in the residents. Research shows that Indigenous people who live in communities where they are able to participate in traditional activities will rate their levels of happiness higher than those who live in communities where they feel detached. Yvonne Peter from Arctic Village also struggled with growing up in an unhealthy environment. Today he is making a film about suicide prevention, and he also hosts cultural workshops in rural Alaska, bringing the idea of cultural healing to entire communities, empowering people to health. His work acknowledges how historical traumas like colonization and assimilation led to loss of traditional ways, while institutional abuses like punishment for speaking Indigenous language only further exacerbated a deep collective sadness. Peter says self-determination is key to future prevention effort. I'll end this presentation with this 5-minute preview of We Breathe Again, directed by Marsh Chamberlain and executive producer Yvonne Peter. It's a feature-length documentary film about Alaska Native journeys through heartbreak and hope.
Tēnā tai, llagoguantri ko kaniogoguantai. Juguenda a dagogoraf dangerats a goguantri ko ka hanaginchi. Gwent ai gwentridra in hagunsi a dagoraf tai. Nichin goguantri tai gogagwat ad negwar heita en jit ninjaranta.
My grandfather used to say that the things from your past cast a really tall shadow. He told me that I would see our young people taking their lives. He said, it's going to come right up to you and touch your hand. It's going to work right around you.
Every person deals with pain differently. We never want to lose family members. The suicide rates in Alaska are 6 times higher than the national average. My uncle committed suicide when I was a little girl. And he was a great guy. And then he was gone. He shot himself while he was intoxicated.
I wanted to hunt, I wanted to put food away, but I couldn't do it without vehicle and gas money. At that time, I thought the only answer was not to face it. So I started drinking my home brew and it made me brave. That's when I turned the gun on myself and told everybody to stay back. The last thing I remember saying was, "By God, I love you all."
My younger son was drinking. When his dad died, I sure have tough time with him. Really hurt feeling like that when they go like that.
I don't want to get hurt, and I don't want nobody to go through that. Just the feeling of agony and pain.
Ay pani. Ay pani. What kind of knee? Ay pani.
A lot of our people have a vision of being able to reground ourselves in our culture, our traditional values, our way of life, but also be able to be successful in the world today.
What's important for me is that my kids and I aren't just surviving. Our people have been surviving for a while. I feel like what's important is that we're thriving.
Everybody knows everybody here, and if anybody's hurting, I'm always open to listen. I try to help people whenever they ask. That's what it takes.
I'm focused and concentrating on trying to help our people. It is my job, it is my inherited responsibility. Those that you can help, those that you can work with, you give 200%. To give anything less, it's not euchenic, it's not traditional, it's not real. When I see those young people open their eyes, I know in my heart, at that moment, they got it. They value their life.